What up, meatheads? This is Travis, American Butcher, and this is the Meat Block Podcast. This is the weekly podcast where we talk about the meat industry, or we'll take a topic and do a deep dive. And it's been hectic over here at the Meat Block. We just finished our first year, and I'm super excited about that, and I know David and Ryan are as well, being a part of the Meat Block. And without any further delay, let's just start this week's episode. Let's play the intro, and then this is a Q&A with me, American Butcher Travis. All right. See you after the intro.
Good cutting enhances the quality of good meat. In his way, the meat cutter is an artist. Poor cutting results in an inferior piece of meat, regardless of quality.
1 year. Wow. Well, 1 year the Meat Block. That's something. That's certainly a thing. That's something that I didn't think when I started this show would come to fruition. But I am not surprised. I'm usually stubborn enough where I want to make something work. So like I said in the intro, I'm going to be doing Q&A. But before then, I just wanted to give a brief history of why I wanted to do this podcast. I realized throughout my career that I was privileged to knowledge that wasn't easily available for me to come across, without my work experience. And a lot of people online coveted previous knowledge, and the real way for me to be where I am is by working, is by moving across the country several times, about me always saying yes to great job opportunities and then figuring out as I went along. Luckily for me, I am somewhat naturally good at cutting meat, and I absorb information and have a good muscle memory. And I was lucky enough to have mentors and teachers who were generations in this industry that taught me things that were dying, and I was really lucky in that sense. That combined with growing up, I always enjoyed, educating and school. And I was a, volunteer PE teacher, and I did volunteer work that, I don't know, I just, I got something out of teaching people. Even though and being dyslexic, I couldn't be an educator in any conventional sense. Fuck, I didn't even go to college. But one thing I did have was a drive to be the best at whatever I chose I was going to be. When I was working in the tile industry, I wanted to be the best tile setter. When I was in high school and I was in bands, I wanted to be the best at performing and do the best stage presence when I was in the hardcore scene and all this other shit. But throughout my career, I ended up being a butcher. I found myself in Los Angeles, and we would receive carcasses on our day that we were closed, and we would break them for the week into subprimals, and then get the case ready for the following workday, where we just had to trade out the paper and stake the cuts. And the doors would be locked, and we'd be listening to Pandora Station, a mix between Eminem, Hank Williams III, and classic hip-hop, and maybe some Misfits were in there. And we would sit around this big block. I would say it would be 6x4 or bigger, probably 7x4. It would be me, typically two other men, and then a woman, sometimes an apprentice or two, and we would receive two whole beef, and we would primal them out in a couple hours, super artisanal, and making sure we got the Denvers, making sure we got the Terrace Major and the little known Terrace Minor, and all these other super esoteric cuts that, transferred to time. But one thing I really appreciated about this was fine-tuning skills to a speed setting that I already developed working in a packing house. And this allowed for amazing conversation to blossom and develop over the meat. It was butchers talking butchers. We would sometimes have a drink or get a cocktail or go out to lunch and come back and be a little buzz, and conversation would get catty, and we'd tell stories, and we'd bitch about customers and, talk about places we worked, swung our dicks around. It was machismo, and it was interesting. And I was talking to one of the female butchers that was there, and she jokingly said that, we should film this and make a YouTube channel. And, and I said, I thought that was a great idea, but if we were to do it, we couldn't talk about what we were doing at all, that we could only present the audio, like the conversation. Like, we would never address that we were breaking down a carcass, that we would only talk about who's fucking who, getting drunk, getting DUIs and all this other bullshit. And she came up with the name Block Talk, and I loved it. I was like, Block Talk. And that just like made a little earworm that just kind of just stuck with me. And I ended up leaving there, working at a couple other places. I met my wife at that shop, and moved up to Bellingham, Washington, where I reside now, and manage a plant. And I work in an environment where it's very automated, where I have to just make sure systems that are in place are working correctly, whether that's employees or machinery, be it smokers or boning. So a lot of my oversight is all visual, which allows me to have my ears open for audio intake. And Pandora started sucking, and what I used to listen to, it just started playing the same 20 songs, and it would get old, and it felt like there was nothing new. And I asked one of my coworkers what he was listening to, and he said he was listening to a podcast called How Did This Get Made? And I had no idea what the fuck a podcast was. And I signed up to a couple and started listening to some, and I loved it. I've always enjoyed audiobooks. Being dyslexic, I like the literature for the illiterate. When I was growing up, I had, besides watching TV, I would have recording for the blinds and dyslexic, which were audio tapes that were recorded in San Quentin. That's just a side story. And with a combination of, being a little bit bored and stagnant where I was, and at the same time, needing a hobby. And I decided, well, I'm going to do a podcast. I'm going to, that's going to be something creative. And I was like, okay, I'll do it on butchery, but how am I going to do something that's so visual, in a completely non-visual setting? And the first ideas of the show were to, there was this other guy who's going to be a part of it, who I worked with, and David and myself, before Ryan got on board. And we were going to each pick a topic, research it, and then share it with each other once a week, and then do a response to it. And we met up, and that was awesome. And we ran through that scenario, and it was incredibly difficult to organize just 3 people to be in the same place. Then David got the job opportunity where he lives now, because David used to live in where I live, or not like literally where I live, but in the city where I live. And he used to, used to work together. So, and that other guy ended up leaving the company I was at and was no longer in the meat industry. And I got sour grapes over it. So I was like, well, fuck it. If you're no longer a butcher, you can't be on the show. But not really. I just, it seemed too difficult to have a weekly double Skype guest, if that makes sense. Then it was just going to be me and David doing banter. And if you listen to some of our earlier episodes, like the tri-tip and the hot dog, which are some of my favorite episodes, and we still try to do those from time to time. But that was also just difficult with the time difference. David working 1 million hours a week And then the Meat Block Studios is in my stairway. So if my son's home, you hear him on the podcast. So just organizing that was difficult. And that's we evolved and we adapted by doing the segments, bringing Ryan on board, and then doing these things. And so the format of this show, that I would say there is no format. And it's, if you're a listener out there and you want to submit something, by all means, do it. And I'll listen to it and put it on the air if it's like less than like 5 minutes. If it's terrible or I don't agree with what you're saying, then I won't put it on the air. But I want this show to be about you. That's why I always do Q&As. Like in this episode is going to be a Q&A, even though I've been rambling for the last few minutes telling you about why I have a podcast. So anyway, I bought all this audio equipment and I did absolutely nothing with it for 6 months. And then one weekend, my wife and son were down at her parents', and I just said, fuck it. I'm going to release an episode. I'm going to figure this out. And I learned computers, and I learned about RSS feeds, and learned about all this stuff. At night, I would watch dozens of videos on how to edit and best equipment to buy. Now I'm kind of like super into the equipment to the point where maybe a problem. But yeah. And then, so it all stems from me wanting to educate, me wanting to tell stories, and my boredom. So without any further ado, here's the Q&A. Smirky33 writes, what's the average weight of a carcass after it's processed versus when it's alive? So let's say you got a lamb and you got a 80-pound live weight, and its dressed weight is going to be maybe about 40 pounds, depending on the shearing of it and how much ruminants is still in it. Now, let's say you have a hog and you got a live weight of 250 pounds. That's going to give you a hot weight of 180 pounds. So a better margin on the hog versus the lamb in that sense. And they estimate that, about 57% of the meat is going to make it to the table from that hog. And then let's say you got 1,000-pound beef, and then you're going to end up with an average about 600 pounds, hot weight. And these are averages. These are certainly not set in stone, but there are percentages and calculators. There's yield calculators that you could use free online. In my company, we receive lots of carcasses. And I don't mean like lots like a lot. I mean like lots like LOT. And we'll receive a lot and we'll weigh them. And then we'll tell you the yield percentage all the way through the finished product. And we have all that information from since we opened, that we can know that our yield has improved this much or it's gone down. And, I could look at the paperwork and be like, why is the yield so shitty this week? Maybe this guy needs new glasses or something like that. At Wub My Gun writes, what's the oddest deformity you have seen in an animal? Not too many on physical deformities that were caused, during the prenatal cycle. Most of them happen, after the animal's alive, accidents, getting hit by skid steers, broken legs, twisted guts, things like that, abscess and prolapsed assholes, where their butt looks like one of those like red water worm things that you see like at like the Discovery Science store. But one time I was gutting a sheep, and you could tell real quick when animals are pregnant when you go to pull out the bladder and the uterus is right underneath it, and it's swollen, filled with cerebral fluid, and it's purple and spotted, and you could feel instantly once you open the animal up that they're pregnant. And I've seen twins in cattle, which is very rare. Or not, I don't know how rare it is, but I've only ever seen it once in cattle where they were twins. And in sheep, I've seen one with where the deformity in utero, it was missing its lower jaw. like it had like a cleft palate, and it was pretty far along to the point where it was going to be born any day. And usually animals like that are going to be weaned out or wouldn't survive. And then I've seen, in pigs where something happened health wise with the mom, and it ended up miscarriaging, I think, and there is no symbiotic fluid, and like the bones are almost like getting absorbed back in to the body, or something was wrong that it didn't expel the pregnancy properly. So those are like, as far as deformities I've seen, that's pretty much it as far as natural occurring, I guess. Afton Sayre writes, I'm sure in your profession you've experienced and encountered people who are against animal agriculture industry and subsequently the meat industry, especially being very open on social media. What's been the most challenging encounter you've had so far with these people who have this viewpoint, and how do you approach it and eventually deal and analyze it? So dealing with extremists, I guess, or people who don't agree, who have a different dietary decision, who also think it's a political statement. I'm a numbers person. So I'm all about, let's say I get like 100 vegans and I talk to every single one of them and tell them everything with supporting documentation and scientific facts that can't be disproven, even though it's super hard to use facts in this day and age. Even though that's the whole idea of facts, is that regardless of how you interpreted them, they're fucking facts. But let's say I have 100 vegans and I'm able to convert one of them to see things my way, or two of them, or five of them. It's not worth my time to have that discussion based on that conversion rate. So how I normally deal with these people is I just block them. I realize, they're trolls, that a lot of them, and some of them are sincere, or some of them do it for dietary decisions. I don't poke the bear. I don't tag like fuck PETA or fuck veganism or any of that. People are certainly entitled to their dietary decisions, and I personally believe that dietary decisions are Western luxury. I'm keto. I was paleo, and when I was growing up, I was vegetarian. Now, if I was growing up in a developing country, and food was a little bit harder and things like that, I probably wouldn't have that conviction for dietary decisions, and a lot of people wouldn't. And I know that the industry in large is doing a lot of things that aren't too great, and we really need to look at what the goal is. Is the goal for everyone to eat meat, so many meals a day, or to have access to this? We may live eventually be in a time where people look back and be like, I can't believe people used to eat meat 100 years ago because of the effects on the planet. There's a bigger discussion that me arguing with a vegan is not going to solve. And I understand passion and all that. But the reason I don't post pictures of my family on my Instagram page is because I've gotten death threats from extremists. And it's people like that I just assume not to have a conversation with. At Sarah Conan 22, how often do you have pregnant animals? I don't know. I only get carcasses now. But when I used to work slaughter in the springtime and right before, fairly often, or not like fairly, but it wasn't uncommon. Certainly a lot of hobby farmers don't know. People may misjudge something. A castration may have not taken. I've slaughtered the same group of pigs for a farmer, and I told him that one of his sows, had little guy goats in there, because you can see them when they're, even when they're all the way down to like smaller than, a pen cap. If you know what to look for, you could find them. And he's like, that's impossible. And then, a couple of weeks later, I slaughtered a castrated male for him, and there was a receded testicle, like it receded inside the body that never got surgically removed. So it had the scar like it was castrated, but it certainly wasn't. And that kind of fucked up his whole breeding program. And then depending when animals are going to calf, that farmers may knowingly send animals to slaughter with being pregnant. At Shez Prone asks, what's your opinion of the use of celery powder or parsley powder opposed to sodium nitrates that are still the same, or is it used for labeling purposes? So celery versus sodium nitrate. So in other countries such as Canada and other, I think Asian countries, but Canada for sure, it is treated like sodium nitrate, where you have to treat it like a restricted ingredient. And it does the same thing, but what it doesn't have is the flavor and the umami flavor of sodium nitrate. In America, it will be treated as a restricted ingredient, and they will eventually change it from naturally cured to just being cured. But we're in that waiting period for the government to catch up with the new tricks, because when there's money being made, people are going to use buzzwords to sell their product as well as get shelf life. And using celery juice powder or celery salt to achieve that is going to give a better shelf life and have the same effects and still use the term natural. Now, I don't know what the residual nitrates are of celery juice powder, but I do view it as the same. But we did go into it in some detail on sodium nitrate versus natural cure in a previous episode that David and I did. All right. Someone asked, why do no small USDA processors make available beef or veal hooves? Because the zero tolerance would be a nightmare. If you see beef hooves in a store, genuinely they're veal hooves, and they've been scalded and scraped, and then the hoof itself or the claw or the dew claws have been removed, like how you would a pig out of a scalder. And these extra steps, small processors just don't have the equipment to do it besides burn and scrape, but it's going to take a lot to get that hoof off, to get down to the sublayer of hoof. Because when you see a hoof in the case, a beef hoof or even a trotter, you don't see the actual hoof itself. You see what's underneath, essentially the fingernail. Like if you were to remove it, you would see the bed of the nail. You see the bed of the hoof. It's the shape of it, but it's not. It's the layer of has been removed. At WGACA 76, what is the secret to a really solid pork sausage? Well, I like savory and sweet flavors that complement one another, like a sweet Italian with a little bit of spice, like how they serve pâtés with jam, or like my favorite is a sriracha maple breakfast sausage. Now, what really makes a good sausage is knowing your percentages, and like some things you just can't fuck up is, having around 25 to 30% fat to your lean ratio, having 2% salinity, and then grinding your sausage at 27 degrees. And if you have access to instead of mixing your sausage in a mixer where it's going to cause smear and more friction, if you could build your myosin, which is what is like essentially meat protein. If you could do that in a bowl chopper, it's going to give a much cleaner look with much more particle definition versus a grinder. And then other tips for sausage making, just real simple. Say you're making a Italian sausage, and let's say you're making a chorizo, and you're going to add some add your aromatics in the beginning, add your garlic, then add your vinegar, and then do a mixing cycle. Then the last thing you're going to want to add is your salt, because your salt is going to cause the protein extraction, where it's going to draw the moisture out of the meat. It's also going to drop the temperature of your sausage, which is a good thing. But if you do that in the beginning and you have that mixing the whole time, that's when you are going to develop smear. And you don't want that. Smear is going to give a grainy taste, and visually it's just going to look like a shitty sausage. I could go into a store, or I could see people's pages, and I could tell when they added the spice, when they didn't add the spice, and when they did the salt, and if they were using a bowl chopper versus a grinder, what size plate, and all these things. But the real key to making a great sausage is not smearing it, keeping your meat block, titular line, cold, and adding your salt at the end. At Jet Built, if you could choose any cut from an animal for your personal consumption, what would it be and how would you prepare it? Easy, smoked brisket. Smoke it hot to, like almost 200 degrees, so it's leaking and it just falls apart in your mouth. At Braddy Rice, why do pigs not have patty wax? I believe that is the rubber band that you see on beef chucks and lamb shoulders. And I have no idea. Maybe they do, and it's just like, I don't know. I'm not even going to begin to guess. If you know, let me know. If you know why they don't, I could think of like obvious reasons, that their heads are kind of even with their body and they don't need the muscle or that tendon to support the head in an upright position. But besides that, beats me. At Dr. Smokehouse, what do plants in the U.S. do with their blood? If they have a collection program, they could sell it. And if they don't have that in part of their food safety program, it goes to rendering and made into usually cosmetics, dog food, feed pellets, and fertilizer. But it all has to do with, how big the operation is. Is it economic for them to start a blood harvesting process to sell to the general public? Because you got to think about what their market is going to be if they develop something, that how many people are going to want that for them to put in the resource, and then develop a way where before you stick the animal, that area's got to be clean and free of contaminant. So like animals that are essentially dirty, and small plants don't have a walk-through wash like some of the larger plants. And so it would be difficult for them to ensure that there is no fecal or ingesta contamination during the collection. And I worked at a place where we tried to do all the paperwork and all that, and the owner of the company just realized it was too hard, because if you have a blood bin and you're collecting it, and you have a lot that's like 40, or you have let's say you do 40 pigs in a day, right? And you have an inspection on a line, and the USDA says, all right, this pig needs to be set aside for inspection by the vet because its lymph nodes look a little weird, or same with a beef. Now, if you're collecting all that blood in one bin, and then you have to isolate that blood, and you can't because it's mixed in with all these other animals' bloods. And we developed a system using 5-gallon buckets and this this knife that is hollow, that had a hose that would go into it. And we just lost it. We didn't show that much interest. There was really only one chef who wanted it, and just the work was more than this small producer was willing to do. And by a small producer, we're doing, I think at the max, we're doing about 60 head of beef a day. On pigs days, we would do 250, and same on lamb days. So it just wasn't economic for us to invest in what we would need to do a blood collection. At Lady and Die, what's the best way to take care of your knives? How often do you sharpen them or get them professionally refurbished? So I sharpen my knives pretty much every day before I use them. I hone them as needed, and I've never had my knives professionally done. And I would just say do it as needed. You're going to feel when your knife starts slipping. Learn your way around a tri-stone. It's what I used to do all my knives on. I'm still really good at it. Slipped a little bit, but now I have an automated sharpener at work. It's good enough to get the jobs done. And if you have a knife that needs to be sent out for specialty reasons, then that's something you may not want to put on your tri-stone. The knives I use are only like, $20, and they last me, a few years, and they're really good quality knives, but they're not artisan. They're plastic handles. They're for USDA high value or high volume production. At Zender, what's the best way to go from box beef retail job to a more whole carcass processing? Just Google butcher shops and meat processors and packing houses and slaughter facilities, all that in your local area. USDA ones are going to be public knowledge. Go to small farms, see where they get their animals processed. Just me, I fell into it. I needed work, and I got a job, and I just worked myself up. But if you want to get into the industry, they're expect to take a pay cut, a lot of slaughter facilities have quick overturn. So if you start at the entry and you stick it out, then give it some time, and you'll leave with some skills. But you gotta be honest with yourself by what you want to achieve out of it. If you're already a good butcher and you want to learn whole carcass, what would be your end goal? To work in an artisanal shop, or to just have resume building material? At Michael D. Collins asks, low or slow, or hot and fast? How do you guys like to cook? I can only speak for myself here, but low and slow on never hurts, and I love it. But one of my favorite things to eat also is just a cheeseburger. I run a USDA smokehouse for a living, and sometimes I just want to get that quick cook. I'm low and slow all day, running the smoker for 8 hours. At MARCTRJO, do I offer classes? No. And then with a follow-up question, what is your best recipe for kielbasa? All right, kielbasa. What I would recommend, or my best recipe, is very proprietary. But what I can tell you is techniques that you need to make a quality kielbasa. So let's say you're going to make 100 kg of finished product. And so you take your meat block, or let's say you have 100 kg of meat. So you take 50 of that, set that aside. You're going to add some fat, and you're going to add about 5 to 7% ice water, and your aromatics and your spice blend. And you could add your salt in at this point because it's going to be emulsified. Put half your ice in the beginning. Once the temperature gets to I think it's 36 degrees, put the other half of your ice and the other half of your fat, and then emulsify until the temperature gets up to 62 degrees. Some people think that that's a little high, and they bring it up to 56 or 58 degrees. But the 52 is going to cause a better bond and make it be a little bit more elastic, but not chewy. And it's also going to give it a nice snap when you smoke it. Then the other half of your meat block that you set aside, mix into the emulsified product on a slow speed. And if you really want the best quality, if you could smoke it the same day that it comes out of your stuffer and goes straight into the smoker, now I'd smoke it to a temperature of 160 Fahrenheit. And that's going to really give you a quality product. At Brian Bird asks, what's my favorite added value meat product? That's beef jerky. But beef jerky does have a terrible yield. So you got to get cheap meat to do it. And so in the past, I've worked for places that, get old coal dairy cows that are organic and then sell that or then process that into beef jerky. There's nothing wrong. We need to utilize these animals to develop the best closed loop system that we can. But even when you're selling a packet of beef jerky for $8 a pack for not even a pound product, just like $8 for like a few ounces, it's not coming from the best quality that you would think traditionally. And my last question is, what do you do with your pig skin? Now, where I work, we mostly get skinless pigs. When we do get special order for skin-on pigs for certain wholesalers, we'll take the byproduct skin, boil it, and introduce it into our Italian sausage program that we have going. I've worked at places where people in the cut room will take huge slabs of skin and then buy like a $40 tattoo gun on Amazon and then practice their skills. And I actually got a tattoo by one of those people. It's not very good. I worked at another place that would cut the skin into strips, twist them, put them in the oven, and then sell them as dog treats or give them out as dog treats even. I use skin and trotters for crab baiting pots. I learned that from lobster fishermen in New England would take the skin off our hands. And you could use it for cracklings and chicharrones and the traditional things that people usually do with it. All right. I want to thank everyone for submitting their questions. And the reason I wanted to do this podcast was so I could have this direct communication with other butchers and other people who were curious. Because I did find it very difficult when I was starting to find information or quick answers, because a lot of people don't want to share them. A lot of people want to be the best, and that's great. And I'm not saying I'm better than anyone. I just want to make getting the information easier than it was for me. When I was being trained by some of the old timers, they more or less saw it as passing on the knowledge so it doesn't die. And that's what I really want to do.
Between now and then, seems like a long, long time. I'd duck beneath the radar and I'd sneak across the line. Stop up in St. Albans and up in Montreal. I'd make pretend I didn't know what was being bought and sold. Strange folk in this dirty game. One was so evil I won't even say her name. She had me from the first time around. She held me so sweetly as she pinned me down. And it felt so real, it felt so right. All we ever did was eat and drink and fucking fight.
All right, that's going to do it for this week's episode of the Meat Block Podcast. I just want to say thanks for everyone who submitted the questions via Instagram. And if you have any questions for us here at the Meat Block Podcast, I just want to say you could email them to us at themeatblockpodcast@gmail.com. You could tweet us at themeatblockpod or Instagram us at themeatblock. If you want to get a hold of me, I'm at American Butcher on Instagram. And Ryan and David will return on next week's episode. I got to scrape my block a little bit here and just want to say I am so glad that Simon the Butcher is doing better. I've never met the guy. I feel like we're friends. And it's weird with social media that I could have, or we are able to develop friendships with people that we've never met in real life. But that's what I want this podcast to help do, is to help bring in community. And if you want to be a part of that community, then head over to our Facebook group. There's a lot of good conversation happening over there. There's no judgment. There's no dumb arrogance. There's no dicks waving in the wind. It's just good, wholesome fun. Also, big thanks to Neil for last week's episode. His coverage was amazing. So thank you again so much for that. And if you want to support the show, honestly, the best way to do that right now is to open up the Apple Podcast app, type in the Meat Block, and leave a 5-star review. And please leave a comment. Until next time, keep your knives sharp and live in the margin.
Back in time, I think about the love and lust that I left behind, and it's goodbye.